What's up guys, the Strong Boys 19 here. This is going to be another album review for a new 2021 release. And I'm going to be reviewing the latest album from the band Biffy Clyro, entitled The Myth of the Happily Ever After. This is the band's 9th studio album from one of the biggest, infamous and famed alternative rock bands from Scotland, Biffy Clyro, released through 14th Floor Records in the UK and Warner Brothers Records in the US, following their 2019 album, A Celebration of Endings. Now, as much as I love quite a lot of these different varieties of rock bands and really liking more of the modern direction of rock involving bands like Kings of Leon to the Foo Fighters, I think Biffy Clyro as a band are one of my personal favourites. Though in their discography, in the earlier mark of albums, they have been one of my favourites, and I really like the other albums, including Only Revolutions, which is one of my favourites, and the double album of Opposites, and as well as Infinity Land. But I really do admire and appreciate what Simon and the Johnston brothers can really make and provide in whatever kind of inspiration they do make and participate in their own craft and way of writing. And this album is maybe and arguably their most experimental record, because along the direction that the band did take on earlier albums, they decided to dig in more and more further into a bolder and a switchable direction, in this case of approach, with the band's music. And there's quite a lot to absolutely think about and dive in with this record. The first track on the record, Dum Dum, opens on an ambient introduction to slowly start the music and drones softly with the vocals as melody, and then you hear the background drums like a bit of an industrial type of tone, the way it was mixed and produced. Then the band decides to continue very consistently, then the louder guitars burst out, and then the structure begins to expand more volumes within the structure. This is more on a very basic form of its writing without expanding a lot, but it's a pretty dramatic start, which then leads into A Hunger in Your Heart. This has very good guitar riffs, and the drums do anticipate as well as the verse sections. There's a lot of these diverse guitar lines with the main direction. It's a very well performed chorus as well after the direction of the verses go. It's a commanding melody and a lot of interaction between the drums and the riffs. And I think that this has an absolutely great delivery at the same time here, because I think there's a lot of these attacking and stomping sounds on a song like this. A really well-balanced number. Denier, this is a number where, again, does have a banging intro on the band with their energy. And then hearing some noises of synthesizers in various places, tons of crashing cymbals, and absolutely nice, clean, distorting guitars as well. There's a lot of the more upbeat, quicker tempo, and I really like more of the interaction between the riffs and the punches that the band really deliver on this track. So it works very comfortably along with the vocals, and the chorus does flow with the cleans. Separate Missions. Now, this is absolutely a very noticeable number, because this is a mix that makes me think on a bit of like a New Order-ish type of vein, along with the thick bass line to follow the beat and occasional noisy effects and distortions. But it takes things further into different directions on switching versatilities, and there's more on a minor type of direction with what the band wanted to make something very experimental. This is a track that really does not dive in a lot onto its main progression, but I think it is a decent number with what the band wanted to explore. but for me as a song, this is not really one of my personal favourites. Witch's Cup. This is a beginning with the absolute loudness involving brass, and then decides to then take it down onto more softer vocals and clean guitar interaction with the harmonies. I think that this is absolutely a very neat direction of the instrumentation, which makes it to me more on a more inspired, complex style into the tightness and the band's way of songwriting. And I think this is really a well-arranged number, because I think that this delivers incredibly well onto the bigger, more adventurous sound. So I think that Witch's Cup is one of the other best tracks, and that is the same thing onto the next track of Holy Water, which at first was going to be like at a consistent folky acoustic balladry type of vein, but weirdly this does make me on a bit of like a Neil Young approach, especially onto the calmer acoustic guitar deliveries, and then onto the other sounds of the guitars with the higher notes that made me think on a bit of like a John Squire or a Johnny Marr type of inspiration. This is a song where it paces itself so brilliantly, and absolutely the crescendo part that the band just explodes right after the main fruition of the track. This is a wonderful number and one of the other excellent numbers of the record. Errors in the History of God. This is when the band switched back into the experimental vibe, as that some of the bass lines were extremely efficient, and as well as the rhythmic drums, and the music goes in different directions with some more acoustic guitars and softer, calmer vocals. But over time, this is more on a poppy kind of touch, as well as hearing the occasional blasting drums and the loud guitars to bring in the sound some more oomph, multiple changes, and a memorable chorus. So a very well solid track to follow up the previous two songs. Then we go, in my opinion, maybe my personal favourite number of the record, which is Haru Urara. This is absolutely neat, from these guitar chords and licks with the softer passages that moves so comfortably, and I really like the moodier setting because of the way the song progresses, again with some more of the adrenaline and hook that the band decides to dive into after the first half of this instrumentation. And I really think that this is just as presentable and as another one of the highlights, because I think that this does deliver into a separate character that I appreciate really much. So I absolutely will love this track more and more over time, and I think that this type of shift and move for Simon and the rest of the band here, they have made one of these diverse and unique passages of instrumentation. Then we hear the track of Unknown Male number 1, synthesizer moods to begin that similar type of ambient vein like on Dum Dum, but then as the beginning paths go, you hear these more programmed beats as the drones of the chords moves along, and then decides to continue the more simple way of songwriting, but it does connect very effective chord hits and booming bass and drums. The vocals from Simon go in various ways with some more emotion and expression from the ascending to descending paths on his own registers, which I really like because it gives him a lot of the variety on his tone. Though I think besides the very well performed finale part of the track, this is not one of my personal favourite numbers, but I really admire and appreciate the style. As with some of the lyrics go onto the record, they were in a deeper, more of a personal reflection type of scenario for lyrics. And that's what I do dig quite a lot with what the band wants to explore in many ways of scenarios with any imagination of lyrics. Then unfortunately we go into personally my least and weakest favourite number on the record, which is Existed. This is another one where they go in the modernised, poppy, synthetic approach. Nothing really all that special into the instrumentation. Simon's vocals in the falsetto range, while the modern style production and basic songwriting goes. But I think that it's extremely bleak and pedestrian and doesn't really match up as well as most of the tracks on the record. Personally, I find that this is just as a bland number that was not really all that dynamic, and this is just a number that I personally will maybe regard as one of my least favourite Biffy Clyro songs. Finale track of Slurpy Slurpy Sleep Sleep. Then the beginning decides to distort itself immediately on these frenetic distortion keyboard tones, and then hearing like a vocoder type of noise on the vocals as it repeatedly goes on and on very repetitively with its loop. And then there's some aggressive destructive drumming that syncopates along with the vocals. There's a lot of these rhythmic drumming patterns that were always excellent, and there's a bit of a heavier type that I think would mark Biffy's most aggressive part besides the ending of Unknown Male, with the way the guitars sounded on this particular track. But I think that this was a really well-crafted finale to finish off the album, because I think it was just as a unique way to close the album off. I think one of the other better moves in that type of direction when they go in many directions. Overall, I think The Myth of the Happily Ever After by Biffy Clyro is a very, very solid record, really good in musicianship and performances, and I do appreciate what Simon and company decide the songwriting goes, though it's not one of my favourite albums from the band, besides the other weaknesses that I've addressed, and a few involving some of the weaker lyrics and not as the well-strung and favourable approach of songwriting. But with most of the majority on the record, I think that this is a record to absolutely appreciate, with what you would like to dive in with, what a trio band like Biffy Clyro can really make in their newer direction as a band. I'm going to give this album an 8 out of 10, and this is a record that I do like, though absolutely not one of my personal favourites from the band, nor one of the best records of the year. But I am very curious to see what you guys personally think of this album in the comments down below. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll keep you guys posted for more videos in the near future.